Oh, what are you? Are you bad? Please tell me you're not bad. Are you bad? Are you bad? You're not bad. You're cute. Okay, you're cute. Okay. I thought you were dangerous. You're cute. You're cute. Okay.
What's your drink of choice?
A Negroni.
I was going to say the same thing.
Magliato. With Prosecco in it.
Oh, stunning.
Yeah.
Goodbye.
But when will I see you again?
Oh, never, never. Well, maybe someday.
Oh, I'm gonna do that anyway. I'm gonna do that anyway because that's how I am.
Teens and young people are not okay. In iGen, why today's super connected kids are growing up less rebellious, more tolerant, less happy, American psychologist Jean Twenge writes about how young people's screen time is having adverse effects like nothing before seen in previous generations. In both the US and the UK, rates of depression amongst teenagers began to rise exponentially from 2012. And from around 2012 was the time when Gen Z began to use smartphones and social media for more than several hours a day. And in line with this rise, national representative samples of US teenagers aged 13 to 18, as well as college students, show that young people and teenagers are spending far less time on in-person social interactions, like riding in cars just for the hell of it, socializing with friends as well as family in person, going to parties, and even dating in real life. Adolescents' feelings of loneliness increased sharply after 2011. Adolescents low in in-person social interaction and high in social media use reported the most loneliness. And after declining for years, the unaliving rate for 15 to 19-year-olds shot up between 2007 and 2015, increasing by 31% for boys and more than doubling for girls. And at the same time, young people are having less sex with fewer sexual partners than both their parents and their grandparents. And this has been attributed to many a thing, from being in education, especially higher education, for a lot longer than previous generations, all the way to the gradual influence of technology on our lives. But with all these various, very practical, very obvious and self-explanatory explanations, one that I have not heard at all is one that I think is very important. But you know one thing in the 80s that the kids couldn't do that we can? They couldn't download directly onto their smartphones what has become one of my all-time favorite apps, Babbel, one of the world's top language learning apps and the very kind sponsor of today's video. ¿Vos está procurando algo nuevo para aprender? Even though the pronunciation was a little bit off, the vocabulary was spot on. Well done. Keep it going. Just keep nodding. So are you looking for something new to learn? Well, that's what initially led me to Babbel. I was initially really inspired to learn Portuguese after going to Portugal and really loving the culture, the people, the landscapes, just everything. And then I came back home and I became absolutely obsessed with Brazilian bossa nova music, specifically from the 50s and the 60s. And I was initially very perplexed with where to start. I think with anything involving language learning, you sort of think, what language? Where do I start? Where do I find something? Blah, blah, blah. Your mind just frizzles up. And that is where Babbel came in. And with 14 different languages to choose from, you can truly learn something brain-stimulating, exciting and new with Babbel. Elas denunciaram o crime ou polícia.
Vocês economizam água.
Vocês economizam água.
Eles economizarão muito pouco.
Elas economizaram muito pouco. Now, one of the main things I really love about Babbel is that all the classes have been carefully curated by over 150 language teachers and experts just for you. And not only have Babbel's lessons and methods been scientifically proven, provado cientificamente, to work, but you can specifically mold them for your schedule, your lifestyle, what you want to learn, and how you want to learn. Now, Babbel is offering you an absolutely incredible deal through me. If you use my link down in the description box, you will get an incredible 60% off your Babbel subscription. And not only do you get a 20-day money-back guarantee, you also get 2 absolutely free live classes with your subscription. So really, what are you waiting for? Now remember, that is 60% off your subscription using my link down below. Value Babbel, and value to all of you for supporting me and giving me such amazing opportunities. I cannot thank you enough. And now let's get back to the video. One thing that I haven't heard spoken about at all in the mainstream mainstream is what kind of sex is contemporarily on offer to young people. Because surely, if the sex on offer was something worth putting video games and social media down for, wouldn't we all be flocking? The positive physical and emotional effects of sexual contact and intimacy are constantly being raved about by contemporary religious leaders, by influencers and experts alike. So why does it feel like increasingly nobody is interested in hot and heavy sex and lovemaking? Dr. Debbie Hubernick is a research scientist and sexual science educator, and for the past 4 years, her Center for Sexual Health Promotion has been analyzing the rapid rise of rough sex among college students, particularly sexual strangulation, and what is colloquially referred to as choking. For the sake of brevity and YouTube just in general, I'll just be abbreviating rough sex to RS for the rest of this video. Interestingly, RS, or in sex, has only been normalized since, again, the early 2010s. I'm sure you're noticing a pattern here that the early 2010s seem to really be a very crucial time when it comes to a lot of this. And this is a very recent phenomena and normalization, as is indicated by the testimonies and shared experiences of women older than 40 who have now re-entered the dating market since and onwards from 2010. Women particularly report returning to the dating market in their 40s or 50s after the end of a long relationship and finding that expectations of sex and often serious violent are totally unrecognizable from their experiences as young women in previous decades. And what the 2021 findings by Dr. Debbie Hubernick show is not just the rapid rate in which this form of intimacy is increasing. 80% of the representative samples surveyed by Hubernick had engaged in RS with their current romantic or sexual partner, but especially the age at which it begins. The rate of those women who said that they were between the ages of 12 and 17 the first time that, namely choking, happened, had shot up to 40% from 1 in 4. The British Broadcasting Corporation, the BBC, surveyed women ages 18 to 39 across the whole of the UK and asked them the following question. Thinking specifically of the occasions you have experienced slapping, choking, gagging, or spitting during consensual sexual intercourse, have you ever felt pressured, coerced, or forced into doing such acts? And note that this question was only asked to women who had previously responded saying that they had experience with RS in the first place. I was personally quite horrified by this, but a very high 42% of respondents said that they felt forced, coerced, or pressured every time or most of the time when such acts occurred. And by referencing this example in the UK is definitely not just exclusive to the UK or to the US. Similar findings have been found in Iceland, in New Zealand, in Australia, in Italy. And it is evident that nowadays it is very difficult to talk about such things. And I would say that this is mainly down to 2 reasons. Firstly, although we are allegedly sexually liberated, it is still very difficult and culturally quite taboo to talk about real, genuine sex and sex issues with both traditionalists and also with progressives. And I would also say, just based on my reading and my experiences personally, it is difficult to speak about such things because as soon as you do, kink and kink shaming is brought into the equation and the conversation is immediately abandoned. I have no interest in that. I am only interested in the 42% of women and the increasing cohort of 12 to 17-year-old girls who are being choked and don't know why. Now, based on my readings of testimonies, of data, and of studies, this has only really become mainstream and normalized since 2010. And a lot happened then. As I've said, Gen Z got their smartphones, but we have also gone through a global pandemic in which those smartphones became our only true and most crucial access to the outside world, to friends, and to family for a very impactful period of time. And I most definitely do believe that that legacy persists. I've also noticed, and I'm sure you have noticed, that popular culture seems to be very enamored with depictions, oftentimes very stereotypical depictions of sexuality and sex in rather exaggerated and sensationalized ways. And I would say that this sensationalism and exaggeration really reached its peak with the 50 Shades mania and has only plateaued code, not as a result of people losing interest, but more so as a result of this normalization, as a result of RS becoming a representation of what normal intimacy actually is. And I don't reference 50 Shades because it is responsible per se. I reference it because it represents how something like BDSM, which requires not just proper, thorough education, but also high levels of very mature, intelligent, open and honest communication, can be mainstreamed by someone, by laypersons like E.L. James or Sam Levinson, the director or writer of Euphoria and The Idol, or an industry like the explicit adult content industry that is entirely ill-equipped to convey this very crucial information to an increasingly younger and younger demographic who are engaging with such content, with such messaging, with such explicit material.
I'm your secretary.
There's a very overlooked reason as to why I think young people are having less sex, and also as to why young women and young girls increasingly are seeing RS as an option, as a consensual option on the table when it comes to having sex. RS is something that more and more women are consenting to, and I don't think it helps us to gloss over that fact of the matter. And that is completely fine. However, I do think that there is a reason as to why modern women and teenage girls are more willing to have RS. In short, it has to do with the orgasm gap between men and women when it comes to engaging in mixed sex, casual, and long-term committed sexual relations. And bear with me when I try to explain this, but it isn't so much the orgasm gap in and of itself that is the crux of the issue, in as much as it is what it represents for young girls and for women. The realization of that gap by women and by teenage girls has crucially done something when it comes to these women's and girls' expectations of having sex. The problem, that is the orgasm gap and the subsequent issue associated with it, is not inherent to men or to being heterosexual, but to the dominant sexual scripts associated with heterosexual sex. And these sexual scripts often purport that a woman's pleasure and sexual satisfaction is not culturally or interpersonally prioritized. And this is especially clear when sex is depicted always as the most important sexual act when it comes to heterosexual sex, even though it has very little, if anything, to really do with where women get most pleasure. That is from clitoral stimulation, which is never demonstrated or depicted or referenced anywhere. Thus, our societal conceptualization of sexuality creates an orgasm disparity out of what is, in actuality, an anatomical similarity. That is, the and are homologous structures. While biological factors certainly play a role in orgasm experiences, there is little evidence for a sex difference in biological capacity to experience orgasm. To the contrary, many women have a shorter orgasmic refractory period than men, which allows them to potentially experience more orgasms in a shorter period of time. True that. Now, orgasm needn't be the objective of a fully satisfactory sexual experience or a fully satisfactory sexual life. On the contrary, there is no universal way to be sexually satisfied. But I believe that when the sexual script for men and boys is reduced to the goal of orgasm, and increasingly to RS and explicit content, and the sexual script for women and girls is increasingly reduced to looking and acting in as close a proximity to women depicted in such explicit content in the service of men, the very idea of a mutually pleasurable and meaningful sexual experience falls to the wayside. And this sexual script is completely antithetical to everything that modern men and women are encouraged to be and are beyond the bedroom. The sexual script is also entirely contrary to everything that makes individuals happy, to what makes us feel loved, and importantly, what makes us feel respected in being loved. Therefore, why would young people want to have sex in the first place if this is what is on offer? And if and when young people, specifically young women and teenage girls, do have sex, why would they object to RS when most of their sexual experiences are not in in the service of their pleasure, when they or we are programmed culturally and interpersonally to not expect sexual satisfaction in the first place. A new and very comprehensive study published only a few days ago shows that a woman's expectations for orgasm and things like clitoral stimulation significantly decrease when she's partnered with a man relative to when she's partnered with a woman. Women's expectations and sexual behavior are therefore informed by what they experience. Because such a large percentage of women don't expect to orgasm with men, they therefore don't actively pursue orgasmic pleasurable sex in the first place. Gender differences in orgasm expectations are still prevalent. With men, orgasm is the expected outcome, whereas with women, orgasm is seen as merely an achievement or a bonus. When sex is depicted in the mainstream or in the media, it is always a very male vision, irrespective of what kind of sex or sexual activity or even sexuality is being depicted. And as I said, I think that this really speaks to a crucial reason as to why RS is being rapidly normalized, and also as to why especially women and teenage girls are increasingly on board with consenting to RS in a way that really otherwise wouldn't make much sense. And oh, it gets so much worse.
Defense attorneys for 65-year-old Richard Patterson say he accidentally choked his girlfriend during sex.
And they were preparing to use a very unusual defense, but that testimony never happened.
The defendant is not guilty.
Richard Patterson didn't say a word Monday, but his body language said it all. Embracing his attorney, then a crowd of supporters. Jurors took 5 hours Monday before finding Patterson not guilty of his girlfriend, Francisca Martinez, in October of 2015.
This was a terrible tragedy that happened to this lady who my client was very much in love with.
Now Patterson, a resident of Margate, was charged with second-degree after Martinez's decomposing body was found inside her condo. Prosecutors argued that the 65-year-old never called 911. Instead, he phoned a friend who told him to call an attorney. Throughout the trial, the defense claimed Martinez had choked to while performing oral sex on Patterson, but her official cause of was never determined.
Now, there is a reason as to why RS, and specifically choking going mainstream, is not at all a good thing for most women. And I say gendered because the normalization of choking and choking in general is a very gendered phenomenon. Nowhere will you see the new normalization of choking being performed on anyone but a woman. That is nowhere outside of explicitly demarcated BDSM contexts. From what I've seen and researched, BDSM is entirely different to what is going on here and to what I am talking about. The problem that is being referenced to here and that I'm talking about has been perfectly summarized by author Peggy Orenstein. Although you may feel one way about being erotically asphyxiated, our brains are not wired to distinguish between being strangled out of love or out of hate. If your partner is strangling you out of love or because you want it, the outcomes can still be the same, and these outcomes can be catastrophic. Neuroscientist Keisuke Kawata has been reviewing and researching the effects of sexual choking and strangulation during sex on the human brain. And Kawata's findings were very, very interesting. And I think that they were very interesting for me because of how prevalent it is for feminists, contemporary feminists nowadays, to equate the likes of RS, of violent sex, and of women having dissatisfactory and unpleasant sexual encounters with the prevalence of casual sex and especially hookup culture. Sexual choking / strangulation disproportionately affects women as well as sexual and gender minorities, and is more common between relationship partners, that is, with people in long-term relationships or with one steady partner. So this works contrary to the popular belief that is often spread that it is merely women who engage in hookup culture and casual sexual encounters or have short-term individual partners or many partners that are experiencing this kind of rise and prevalence of RS. In fact, it is the contrary. And what I think is also important to mention is that the health effects of being sexually strangled are similar, if not nearly identical, to the short-term, the long-term, and the permanent brain injuries that are not oftentimes known immediately or knowingly. The 5,000 women that I mentioned above who were sampled by Dr. Debbie Hubenek mainly reported what is called called short-term health sequelae from being choked. That is lightheadedness, neck swelling and or pain, headaches, temporary loss of coordination and ear ringing, bruising and loss of consciousness. However, short-term sequelae can have long-term and undetected health implications for women. And these implications are quite scary when you think that most young women, and especially and obviously young teenage girls, are not going to go to a doctor to check on how they are doing neurologically. In MRIs conducted by Dr. Kawata and his colleagues, undergraduate women who have been repeatedly choked show a reduction in cortical folding in the brain compared with a never choked control group. They also showed widespread cortical thickening, an inflammation response that is associated with elevated risk of later onset mental illness. In completely simple memory tasks, their brains had to work far harder than the control group, recruiting from more regions to achieve the same level of accuracy. The hemispheres in the choked group's brains too were badly skewed, with the right side hyperactive and the left underperforming. A similar imbalance is associated with mood disorders, and indeed, in Dr. Hubinek's surveys, girls and women who had been choked were more likely than others, or choked men, to have experienced overwhelming anxiety, as well as sadness and loneliness, with the effect more pronounced as the incident rose. Women who had experienced more than 5 instances of choking were 2.5 times as likely as those who had never been choked to say that they had been so depressed within the previous 30 days that they couldn't function. Although no causal relation has been thoroughly or representatively researched as of yet, this is all very new and very recent, depriving your brain of oxygen is clearly not a good thing. And it isn't good not just because of vital neurological realities, but also because of something which again and also since 2010 has increased rapidly, and that is known as the rough sex defense. And this is a legal defense that has starkly emerged since the normalization of RS and choking. A UK-based group called We Can't Consent to This has collected national and international data on what has been called the sex gone wrong defense. And this is when RS or SM, sadomasochism, is used as a contextual feature when it comes to male on female unaliving cases. And although this defense has been used since the 1970s, it was very rare. That is until 2010. In fact, since 2010, there has been a 90% increase in the use of the sex gone wrong or RS defense.
Prosecutors on Friday went at the heart of the defense's argument that oral sex 60-year-old Francisca Martinez.
She had all her faculties, she'd be able to fight back.
Yeah.
And if there's a in her throat, whether it's consensual or not, and she begins to choke, how would she react?
Under ordinary circumstances, she will object to being strangled.
The defense's expert witness had trouble remembering whether his medical expertise first raised the possibility that Martinez choked to on her boyfriend's or whether the idea came from the defense.
I can't remember. It could well have been mine. I've had other cases like that.
Significantly, all, that is, RS defense cases involved a male suspect or offender. Strangulation was the most common cause of the ending of one's life, that is in 66% of cases. Significantly, perhaps, in at least a third of cases, the suspect or offender had previous convictions for gender-based including the unaliving of woman, of the most severe form of sexually woman, of attempting to unalive woman, as well as kidnapping and Now, I'm not going to go into full detail on these cases, mainly because of how incredibly distressing it is, but also because YouTube really doesn't like it when you talk about such things unless you're a 1 million subscriber true crime channel. So I have left all resources and information and data, as well as testimonies and specific cases down below in a document. The information, the studies, and the data that have been comprehensively collected over a decade by the We Can't Consent to This campaign is very interesting and I think is very important. But to summarize all this data and information, the RS defense has made it legally viable for a defense to be at a very unfair and rare advantage. They are able to present a narrative of sexual libido and desire to frame the incident as sexual rather than violent. And it is difficult to challenge this because of the victim's inability inability to provide evidence. And I talk about all this because of two things that seem very important and are also somewhat worrying. Firstly, non-fatal strangulation has morphed into a mainstream eroticism and is being increasingly normalized. And secondly, non-fatal strangulation has systematically been cited as a primary indicator that a man will end the life of his female partner. Now, I'm not creating a false causal relation, but it is a fact that there has been a 90% increase in RS defenses since this normalization of non-fatal strangulation in the erotic context. This mainstreamed eroticism is proving itself 90% times more than 5 decades ago to be dehumanizing women and teenage girls like Hannah Pearson, who was only 16 at the time that her life was taken from her. And increasingly, I can't help but think, is this how sex is meant to work now?
Would a human toilet be a suitable compromise?
So I read E.L. James' Magna Opera when I was a teenager, and it honestly didn't bother me, it didn't upset me, it didn't excite me. I was very indifferent to it. And I don't know if I was indifferent to it because I was a very Christian South African teenager who really didn't know what I was reading, or because gender-based and sexual are so endemic to South African culture and life that it was actually quite nice to read that this abusive man bought his girlfriend a car in a first edition of Thomas Hardy. But what I do find ironic and quite reflective now is that even Christian Grey ruled out erotic asphyxiation with a dewy-eyed Anastasia Steele from pretty much the get-go of their relationship. Nevertheless, the 50 Shades of Grey franchise has regrettably, albeit complicatedly, left a rather depressing legacy. For years, BDSM practitioners and domestic campaigners have accused the series of normalizing abusive behavior, arguing Grey's possessiveness, jealousy, and obsession with Steele had been unhelpfully conflated with BDSM. Natalie Collins set up the 50 Shades' domestic campaign in 2014 because she was concerned about how many women and girls might think is normal or sexy, and how the series might add to that. She adds, 50 Shades brought a niche sexual practice with its own rules, nuances, and safety mechanisms into mainstream consciousness without bringing any of the rules, nuances, or safety mechanisms with it. It led to a shift in cultural consciousness, which now presumes that, rather than this being a niche thing, large swathes of women are turned on by pain and powerlessness. And so many things have begun to culminate in both normalizing and expecting abusive sexual behavior in our current culture. I personally find that there's something eerie in the fact that we are more educated, we have more access to information, we are at least social media literate, we are far more invested in and appreciative of self-expression, especially when it comes to sexuality and your identity via sexuality. And of course, with a growing cohort of people, specifically younger generations, being sex positive is all the rave. And yet, at the same time, we are suffering disproportionately from mental health issues, from an orgasm gap that hasn't improved much from when the phenomena was first researched and taken seriously, from loneliness, and what could be convincingly deemed rather aggressive and violent intimacy expectations. And I recalled this paragraph from scholar Camille Paglia when I was doing research for this video, which really sums up this point and a lot of what I think I've really been reckoning with when thinking about choking. Sexual freedom, sexual liberation, a modern delusion. We are hierarchical animals. Sweep one hierarchy away and another will take its place, perhaps less palatable than the first. There are hierarchies in nature and alternate hierarchies in society. In nature, brute force is the law, a survival of the fittest. In society, there are protections for the weak. Society is our frail barrier against nature. When the prestige of state and religion is low, as it is contemporarily, men are free, but they find freedom intolerable and seek new ways to enslave themselves through drugs or depression. My theory is that whenever sexual freedom is sought or achieved, sadomasochism will not be far behind. Romanticism always turns into decadence. Nature is a hard taskmaster. It is the hammer and the anvil, crushing individuality. Perfect freedom would be to die by earth, air, water, and fire. And the same premise applies to the mainstreaming, the sudden mainstreaming of the choking trend among a younger and younger demographic of, well, kids. Choking and RS in general are clearly not exponentially improving women's and men's sexual satisfaction and sex lives, especially when looking at orgasm statistics and declining sex rates. And I think it is fair to say that sexual liberation and sexual freedom are not something that modern societies have at all adequately prepared themselves for the realities of, especially when time and time again, history shows how terribly inadequate we are at preparing ourselves for what freedom really means, both politically, but I would say especially personally. Choking and RS most definitely cannot be improving the sexual satisfaction and sex lives of teenagers who are already uniquely burdened with the lifelong venture of trying to find your identity on social media at a time in their short lives when they don't have the tools nor the knowledge to communicate or even understand themselves fully or deeply. But things like TikTok, explicit content, and I think the expectations of, I would say, particularly identity politics, have made it something that young people are increasingly trying to discover in and of themselves at a very young age, when they just do not have the resources, the tools, the communication skills, the depth of knowledge to do so. If adults don't, which we clearly do not, how on earth do we expect very young people to? And I do see an interesting parallel with how surface level a lot of identity and identity politics and identity discovery is, insofar as it's just trends or aesthetics. I see the parallels in that, and with how surface level a lot of our discussions and understandings and positivities or traditionalisms around sex are. So much emphasis and interest in sex and sex lives is only surface level stuff. For instance, what age is it appropriate to teach children about sex, or who should be teaching children about sex? And it appears that we have forgotten about the very raw and human aspects of sex. Because it is clear to me, especially in researching this video, that sex is a hell of a lot more than just consent. I think right now we have, in general, in just modern society, sacrificed a lot of things, whether it be love, caring, affection, mutual respect and regard for somebody else and their feelings, and especially their individuality, because that is hard. It's complicated. We are all a lot lazier than I guess we would have otherwise been a few generations ago. These things are also time consuming, they're awkward, and they are especially very new, especially in our social media age. And I think that most regrettably, the resources and educational tools for such things are not being funded because there is regrettably no money in the funding of looking into emotions. And I think we are rarely seeing the consequences of this in the dire state of young people's and increasingly in children's mental health. And again, I think much of this has to do with communication, or rather an alarming and rather sad lack of it, and knowing how to communicate, especially when individuals are so starved for love and even an ounce of affection and respect. Reading a piece in The Guardian about this, I was really struck by one testimony of a young man who had been choking his long-term girlfriend for a number of years. One young man who spoke to The Guardian for this piece said he chokes his girlfriend and has done for several years because she likes it. Days later, he got in touch again. I thought about our conversation and asked her about it. She said she doesn't actually like it. She thought I liked it. But the thing is, I don't. I thought it's what she wanted. And I do think that this is what is mostly happening. When young people's initial, and I would argue oftentimes only, exposure to sex ed is via explicit content, it is no wonder that a lot of men, and especially young boys, see RS and aggressive behavior in the bedroom and an intimate context as being what women or females want. And similarly, when women see this explicit content, or they see women on Instagram, or read articles in women's magazines that obsessively talk about spicing up your sex life, a sex life that is oftentimes already dissatisfying in some aspect, or which you imagine can't get any worse if you bring RS into the picture, it's no wonder that this creates a very self-fulfilling and vicious cycle between men and women who don't really really have the tools to communicate honestly and rawly to each other about something that needs a lot of care and a lot of vulnerability to be discussed in the first place. Not just at the beginning of a relationship or the beginning of any kind of sexual encounter with somebody, but throughout your life with your partner or partners. So clearly a lot more needs to be done, but how, I really do not know. Research and awareness are of course a very crucial part of the puzzle, but I also think that not treating children as delicate little sunbeams and flowers who can't possibly understand the realities of life and the world, and especially and most importantly the realities of their own bodies, is probably another piece of the puzzle. I think parents oftentimes like to think that these are things that concern or are happening to or are being done by other kids, and are too afraid to possibly imagine that their little darling could possibly be influenced or involved in such things. And in all honesty, I would argue that this does a lot more harm than good. Molly Manning Walker, the director of the absolutely brilliant coming-of-age drama How to Have Sex, has been going around schools and different institutions talking about not just consent, but the importance of the conversation around sex going beyond consent and ultimately being more than just consent. And I think what she is doing is most definitely a step in the right direction. I'd highly recommend reading this article and interview in Time magazine all about it. It represents a far more real and raw way of talking about sex, not just to children and teenagers, but I would say very interestingly to adults as well. I think as adults, we oftentimes, especially the older we get, we think that we know everything and are infallible to any kind of flaw or not knowing about anything sex related, which is most definitely not the case. Because protecting children also includes informing children, not just about the realities of the world, but I think most importantly about the realities of being a human being in and of themselves as individuals, autonomous individuals who aren't just extensions of ourselves, but are autonomous entirely. But do let me know what you think down below, and do share your experiences if you feel comfortable. I love reading your comments. They are fascinating, and I think that they add even more value to my life and just to my content in general than my content does. So I thank you so much for all of your comments, and in advance I thank you for the comments that you're going to leave below this video, I'm sure. Thank you so much to all of my generous patrons, and thank you to all of you for watching and being here, and for especially giving me the time of day. It means more to me than you could possibly imagine. Don't forget to like and to subscribe. I am trying to get to 200k subscribers. I can't believe that you are getting me there. It's absolutely incredible. I'm unbelieving, really, rather disbelieving. So I thank you very, very much. And I'll see all of you very soon in the next one.